there is no military threat against NATO for now, but in the same time, we have to take it very seriously what Russia is doing in Ukraine. It has intent, capabilities, and it has actually made a decision to invade another country. So that's why NATO today, as foreign ministers, will be discussing the steps towards NATO summit, which is very much about the investment in defense spending, defense industry, capabilities, because we all have that interest to maintain peace and security in our countries. That is a basis for prosperity, for the education, for the social security, and everything else that we as people want.
President Zelensky laid down a challenge to Vladimir Putin. Meet me in Istanbul today for one-to-one talks on the future of Ukraine. Putin has given his disdainful answer. He's sending a former culture minister along instead. Zelensky wanted to show America that he's willing, and he has done that. He wanted to prove that Ukraine isn't preventing a peace settlement. Well, that's one of the biggest questions. What happens next? And we're joined now by somebody who can give us an insight into what's happening in the region. Baiba Braže is the Latvian Foreign Minister and former NATO Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy. Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning.
Great to have you on the programme.
I can hear you very well.
Great. It seems we have a bit of a delay on the line, but that's fine. It appears that Russia is not going to be sending Vladimir Putin today. What do you think that says about Russia's intentions here?
We didn't expect it to happen in the first place. There is no indicator Russia wants peace within Russia. Once you look at all the systemic indicators, economy, politics, religion, military, private sector, it's all about war. So it's a fog that the butcher in Kremlin has tried to create to actually cover his 30-day ceasefire proposal and ask from President Trump, from the UK, from other Western leaders. So in the same time, we think that every effort at peace has to be made because Ukraine and we all want peace. So even at a lower level, if Ukraine decides to meet the Russian delegation, we will regard it as positive.
One of the concerns that people have is that President Putin is using this diplomatic process to create a pause, or at least the appearance of a pause, so that he can regroup and rearm. And there is a suggestion that Russia has been bolstering troops along the Latvian border, along your border, and in similar areas. Are you concerned that Putin is using this to launch a broader attack?
Indeed, those concerns are very prominent, and for now we don't see that the front is folding. So Ukraine is doing what it can do, and Russia has gained very little advantage on the front itself. So continuing to support Ukraine, in the same time weakening Russia's military capabilities is a way to peace, and that is what we all intend to do. UK imposed sanctions, so praise to UK government. EU has imposed sanctions. The US has a strong package, so that is something that is one step towards peace.
Are you worried that Putin could go further and attack Latvia or attack a NATO country? Are you concerned that that could be a next step here?
I don't see that possibility. There is no military threat against NATO for now. But in the same time, we have to take it very seriously what Russia is doing in Ukraine. It has intent, capabilities, and it has actually made a decision to invade another country. So that's why NATO today, as foreign ministers, will be discussing the steps towards NATO summit, which is very much about the investment in defense spending, defense industry, capabilities, because we all have that interest to maintain peace and security in our countries. That is a basis for prosperity, for the education, for the social security, and everything else that we as people want.
And on that, I understand that you spend your weekends in the National Guard service in your own country. You train with other Latvian citizens. Is that something you think the UK should consider, some kind of National Guard service for civilians here?
Yes, and it's actually very popular because what it provides is the ability to understand both how the armed services function, but also to be part of a certain element in the strengthening of the country. It also gives me skills and knowledge that I wouldn't gain anywhere else. And it also has brought me together with the most fascinating, fantastic people. So I'm very happy I did a decision to do that.
And should the UK look to do something similar, do you think? Would it be beneficial here?
Listen, I don't want to teach other countries to do or not, but it's certainly in terms of resilience of society, in terms of sort of more understanding among various groups, among overall sort of society as such, bringing it closer together and standing together. And I think it's good.
Yeah.
But again, every country has to make its own decisions. It's not for us to teach.
Finally, Donald Trump and others have proposed an agreement or an agreement with Russia that would basically allow some Ukrainian land to become Russian, at least in the eyes of some states. What would a deal like that mean for Baltic states, do you think?
I think we have to be very clear that the peace outcome has to be such that Ukrainians can accept it. And for now, we don't believe that recognizing occupation of Crimea or any other occupied parts by Russia, formal recognition, is something that Ukrainians can accept or that international community can accept. Ukrainian borders, territorial integrity are defined actually when Ukraine joins the United Nations. And already in 1991, there has been a pretty straightforward understanding what Ukraine's territory is. And that is how the United Nations has recognized Ukraine. The fact that part of the territory, which is less than 20% since 2014, has been occupied by Russia, doesn't mean that we have to internationally recognize that as legal.
Yeah. Baiba Braže, many thanks for joining us on the programme. That is the Latvian Foreign Minister.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for joining us. Now, listening to that interview was Catherine Philp, who is the Times World Affairs editor. Morning, Catherine.
Good morning.
What do you make of what we're seeing or not seeing happen, crucially, in Turkey today?
Well, indeed, what we're not seeing is just as important and really tells us so much about what's going on. I mean, we've got obviously the NATO foreign ministers are meeting in Antalya in Turkey. Zelensky is positioned in Ankara, meeting Erdogan, and obviously the other parties that are going to speak to each other from Russia, Ukraine, and the US are in Istanbul. Now, we already know that Putin isn't coming. I think that was entirely predictable because Putin doesn't want to negotiate directly with Zelensky. I mean, there was a time when Ukraine forbid itself from negotiating directly with Putin. But the fact is, it's been made loud and clear that Putin doesn't regard Zelensky as the legitimate leader of Ukraine. And therefore, he's not likely to want to ever speak to him directly. And that means really that it looks very, very hard to accomplish what Donald Trump is now appears to be looking to do, which is to try, and he is growing very impatient with this process and wants to pull the Americans out of it and leave it to the Ukrainians and Russians to meet together. But if he can't even achieve that in Istanbul today, it's very hard to see how he can achieve it anytime in the future. So I see really no breakthrough coming out of what happens today. I think we're looking at Russia holding this again, as I think your previous guest suggested, in a holding position, which is to their advantage at the moment.
I want to play a clip of an interview with Sebastian Gorka. He is Donald Trump's Senior Director for Counterterrorism at the National Security Council. We spoke to him a little bit earlier. You'll be able to hear that full interview after 8 o'clock today. But Catherine, one of the things that we find really interesting about this is his tone on Russia. Let's just have a quick listen to Seb Gorka.
It's simply another demonstrable facet of Moscow not understanding that it is in their interest to come to the table with the only man who can bring peace to Europe. So sadly, one more instance of intransigence, but we hope they will see the light, and then the meat grinder of Ukraine and the conflict on the Eurasian landmass can be stopped.
Catherine, how do you assess America's attitude towards this now? You mentioned that Donald Trump wants out. What might he do to Russia to try and force Russia's hand?
I mean, again, it's really unclear because previously, when he's expressed impatience, he's talked about putting these secondary sanctions on Russia, and specifically on allies of Russia that buy its oil. So, obviously, Russian oil sales have diminished since the beginning of the conflict because lots of countries, essentially on NATO's side, don't take it anymore. But there's been no punishment for the oil being sold to places like India and China. So that he has floated that idea before, but then has walked back from it as soon as he's seen any, he seems very susceptible to then any movement after he's come down harder on Russia. Any sort of verbal kind of assurance he's got from Russia tends to move him back a bit. It really, I think, does come down to how much patience he loses. I mean, he could just walk away from this completely without putting sanctions on anyone and just washing his hands of it rather than seeking to influence the process further. I think it's very hard with someone like Trump to see, given he can be so mercurial on these issues, to see how far he will push this. But I mean, we have seen definite signs that one way or another, it is sinking into him that this is not an easy process to wind up. And the question is, whether he does so simply by walking away or by placing further pressure on the party that he may be beginning to realise is actually the one who's standing in the way of any settlement.
Yeah. Catherine, many thanks for that. That's Catherine Philp, the Times World Affairs editor.